Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. In this week's conversation, we are off to the world of events, something I'd perhaps inadvertently neglected in my conversations around the world of hospitality. Certainly, a part of the sector that today's guest, Adam Phelps, feels like the government has forgotten when it comes to recognition of the pandemic's impact and financial support. Adam has been working at the top end of prestigious events for 22 years, and chatting through some of the choreography and the planning required to deliver for clients who expect perfection and are happy to pay for it was inspiring. 100 meals delivered to the table in perfect synchronisation by 50 model-looking front-of-house members, immaculately presented, is just one that creates a vivid picture in my mind. And Adam has looked after famous rock stars, the best jewellery and fashion brands, and big festivals, but more recently has had to be exceptionally creative to find a way to navigate the impact of COVID. Losses have racked up, but Cellar Society are working hard to keep their team employed and to ensure that their loyal customer base does eventually come back to them when permitted to do so. So it feels fitting to be releasing this episode on the day that the government are once again pushing back full opening from the 21st of June, and the nightclub sector and large event companies must not be forgotten. Restaurant and pub garden trade is currently strong, but many in our sector continue to struggle. But this is not a COVID-specific episode, and I think you'll enjoy the conversation. Much of the story is about Adam and his team's adventures and business journey so far. And remember, if you do enjoy the show, please subscribe to the podcast or head over to the website, humansofhospitality.co.uk, and sign up for the newsletter where I will keep you up to date with any new releases. Thanks so much. Adam Phelps, Director at the Cellar Society, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Hugely appreciated. Alas, we are not face-to-face in the same room, as too often is the case in the modern world. But where are you joining me from, Adam? Are you at the office? Are you at home? Where in the world are you?
At home in a little cottage up in the Chilterns near Great Missenden in Buckinghamshire.
Ah, very nice. That's a nice part of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, days like today, it's a perfect place to be.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, good. Well, yeah, thank you so much. So I've not really investigated the events market yet on this podcast, which seems crazy when it's such a big part of hospitality. So I'm really excited to finally get to do that, and even more so excited to do it with you, because the event company that you run is, very prestigious, and you do some serious events, as we're going to get into. Am I right in saying you've been a director at the Cellar Society for 22 years? So presumably you're very well placed to discuss this sector, I guess.
Yes, you make me sound very old, but yes, 22 years. I think we celebrated our 20th anniversary a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's been a long time, and we sort of started in wine tastings, hence the name. So we started doing wine tastings as a form of corporate entertainment for the city banks and property companies many years ago, and that bit by bit morphed into doing catering for those events, and then ended up basically just being a catering company, an event catering company.
Yeah, well, there's an underselling. Look, so it's actually really hard to find out a huge amount about you when you're online, and I sort of realised the more research I was doing that I definitely wasn't your target market, because you really do work. Your homepage on your website lists some of your clients, and you work with some incredible brands, some incredible individuals creating these kind of bespoke events. So can you tell me a little bit about the kind of events you would normally be doing? So let's say pre-COVID, what might a typical week or month look like for Cellar Society, at that time?
Well, it's obviously incredibly seasonal. But at this time of year in particular, we'd be sort of gearing up for the summer. And that would be a combination of lots of small events, which might consist at the lowest end of one or two waiters in boutiques in Sloane Street or Bond Street, helping VIP guests serve champagne and coffees and serving canapes and things like that. And then, ranging right the way through to, via the sort of shop events for 30, 40 people, champagne and canapes, to small dinners in shops, and then the bigger events, which could be private events at people's homes or at venues they've hired for their occasions. And then right up to, the pinnacle of the summer, which could be the Serpentine Summer Party. We do the Cartier Polo every year, which is towards the end of June. And we, sometimes we're doing big dinners for up to 500 people at, some of London's sort of most iconic venues. So it's certainly a lot quieter than it should be at this year round. But yeah, that's what we should be doing anyway.
Okay. And then you're predominantly UK based, are you? Or do you do this sort of globally as well? Or?
We are predominantly UK based, but we do travel quite a lot. That said, Brexit might have put paid to that, but because we've not worked out how we can work abroad since Brexit's happened. But, in the past, we've done lots of events in Paris. Some of our, London brands, even if they're French, would often pay us to go over and do events in Paris. So we've done some incredible stuff for Dior, and we've done weddings for a well-known rock star who I can't mention, and quite a few things over there. And then we've also done a couple of events in Venice, a couple in Tuscany, Capri, the Amalfi Coast. So we would hope that 3-4 times a year we're going abroad, and those are the events we kind of dream of. They're the pinnacle of any event organizer's sort of career, is to organize a big event in another country, and it just adds layers and layers of complexity to it and risk, and it can almost give you a heart attack, but at the same time, it's the ones you look back on and think, wow, that really was, something special.
Yeah, amazing. I'm thinking about just how exciting it is, when I open a restaurant and the, the amount of work that goes into it. But at least that restaurant is going to be there, hopefully for years. And you think of that opening night, it must just be even more incredible to put all of that work in and all of that effort to know that it's literally, it's a one-off. You don't get a second chance. If service goes wrong, that's it. Presumably, these are they only happen once, I guess.
Yeah, and I was trying to think about I knew this, our interview was coming up, and I was trying to think about the main difference between restaurants and an event, and we don't claim to be restaurateurs. Occasionally we dip our toe into that market and do a pop-up restaurant at an event or something like that, but they're quite different, and we often work with some big name chefs, where they've been paid to put their name to an event and design a menu, and we work with them to deliver it. But the big difference for me is, an event is a one-off, and it waits for nobody. That deadline in the sand right there isn't moving. And that creates, from weeks and months out, whether it's the event organizer. I mean, we are on the bigger events, we are a cog in the big wheel. And, some of these big events start 6-9 months out, and the clock starts ticking, and it all starts coming together. It gets closer and closer, but you only get one shot at it. So, obviously, even if you're opening a restaurant, you want that first night to be great. But if there's a few glitches, you probably had a few soft openings, you can iron some of those wrinkles out. Whereas with an event, there's no second chances. But that said, we also, for the bigger stuff, we leave very little to chance, and we minimize risk, and we rehearse quite it is a bit of a stage performance at times, especially when we're doing, for instance, we've done a huge dinner at Banqueting House a couple of years ago for, a big luxury jewellery brand. And it was 3 long tables of 100 people each. And we needed to serve each table at once. So you'd have, you've got 50 waiters carrying 2 plates each, coming into the room. And you basically got to choreograph them walking towards the table, splitting either side of it, walking up either side of it, and then stopping in unison, and then looking at the 2 maitre d's who are standing either end of the table, with a third sort of maitre d calling the orders over the radio, and they're all looking at your head, waiting for you to nod, and then they all put their right hand plate down in front of the guest across them, and then do the same with the left hand, and then they stand up and they all wait for the sign to turn left and clear out. So a lot of the events we do are are choreographed in terms of the service and has to be seamless. When you've got 100 plates going down or 50 plates going down at the same time, you notice when one of them's out of sync. And we probably get the guys for an hour and a half to 2 hours before the event to rehearse this, and you spend half an hour briefing them and an hour rehearsing sometimes to make sure that you do it over and over again, and the repetition hopefully goes in. And we're dealing with some of the guys who work for us the whole time and really get what we do. And then the bigger the event, the more you are bringing in people from agencies, and we do have a bit of a reputation of having very charming looking staff, we say, who are sometimes not the cleverest, and we have to sort of get them all to work as a team, work in unison to deliver something that's very, obviously the food needs to be incredible, but then the service is what often people remember. And we've had people at times applaud when we've done a table of 100 people and it looks perfect.
I'm glad you said that. Sorry to interrupt, but I was literally just thinking that. I mean, the hairs were on the back of my neck were standing up as you were describing it, because I think as an operator, you just appreciate, that level of detail. And I think, I would literally have had to stand up and applaud if you pulled it off, because I'd be like, you go to plenty of functions and events, but normally it takes an hour to get all the tables out. But to do that synchronized in one hit, I'd be like, yeah, fair play. I'm impressed.
We're lucky in some respects that the clients we work with have the budget and the money to enable us to sort of go to that level of perfection seeking. And it does come with that added extra pressure, and that I'm sure you know the feeling as you're getting close to opening the doors for a special occasion, whether it's a restaurant opening or whatever, that the pressure mounts and the nerves start to go up. And I often think that's how you tell a good events person from a bad one is can you stay calm even when internally you are very nervous. And sometimes we did an event for Hermes in Battersea a couple of years ago, and one of my senior event managers, she had to brief 160 people 2 hours before this event started, and this sea of faces in front of you, and doing that the first few times can be incredibly nerve-wracking. You've got all your briefing notes are 3 pages long, so it's the bigger it gets, the more pressure there is, and the more things can go wrong, and inevitably will go wrong. But those are the ones that, if they don't kill you, you look back and think, wow, that was incredible, and no one can ever take that away from me. That's something you can definitely put on your CV as I did that. So the other thing about events people is things will go wrong. A bit like many professions, things will go wrong, and who's capable of coming up with solutions. Clients don't ever want you to go to them with a problem. They want you to go to them, tell them what the problem is and how you've solved it. So, yeah.
I'm sort of stressed out just listening and excited probably on equal measure.
A little bit. I'm getting slight PTSD, I think, from these things.
Yeah, I'm sort of imagining that a lot of people who do events at that level, and for what I'm guessing must be understandably demanding clients, because at the end of the day they're paying the money to have it delivered at that level. But I'm presuming that a lot of people don't do that for multiple decades, because it sounds like the sort of thing that after 10 years you might go, I just cannot cope with that. My nerves are shattered. Are there a lot of people who do come in and out of the sector, or actually there are a few players that have been doing this for a while?
You're not wrong at all. I think there is. The better you are at it, and the bigger the events you do, the more likely you are to sort of say at some point, right, enough's enough. I've heard you talk in other podcasts about, how, there's a shelf life in hospitality. And I would say events is possibly even worse than the restaurant sector in terms of that. The restaurant sector is strong and steady, and you kind of know what's coming most of the time. Whereas events have got much higher peaks and much lower troughs. So, we are very quiet in January and August, and in between September, October, November, December, we are in fifth gear. I've always described it as the gears of a car, but for 4 months we're in fifth gear with a slight break for half term in October. And I think if you don't, what happens is you're working sometimes till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and you've got to be up at 6, 7 and back in the office and planning the next event. And if you don't recover from those, not just I guess there's two sides. There's the stress and the sort of that side of it, and then there's the physical side. And physically, if you don't take the time to sort of take your foot off the brake, it builds up, and at Christmas you literally collapse. I've had so many Christmases where I've got to the 23rd of December, taken my foot off the brake and immediately been, gone down with some sort of cold or flu or something like that. And then I think, again, it depends, which part of the business you're in, but the chefs and the event organizers really do work incredibly hard. And if you're at the top of the tree, you take on more of the pressure. But I think both Bertie and I worked ridiculously hard for 10 years. For me, that was sort of between 30 and 40, and there were downsides to that. Kids were tiny at the time and I wasn't spending enough time at home, but we finally managed to get the business to work after about 10 years. And we never lost money, we just never made money. And money brings with it, success brings a little bit of choice. You can start to delegate some of the jobs to other people and just try. So hopefully now we've got to a point where we're not trying to do everything ourselves. We are running teams of people and, letting them feed back to us and use our experience. For me, that's often about budgets and logistically, am I thinking this all through the right way? For Bertie, are the menus correct? Are you understanding the client and their brand? What kind of people, and making sure the right staff are working on certain events. It's, I think sometimes people look at Cellar Society and think, what, all they're about is pretty boys or pretty staff and pretty canapes, and they don't understand the degree of attention that we pay to everything, whether it's staff and what staff are going to work on what events, or is it about does that member of staff, are they going to get the brand, or are we, you basically need to understand everything about it and get the uniforms all right. So if you've got an event with 10 guys working there, we will know the sizes of all 10 guys, and there'll be a suit, a uniform pack for each of them with their name on it, with spares, a box of spares, so 2 or 3 spare pairs of shoes, socks, trousers, because some of these guys will turn up and have forgotten to bring them. So we leave nothing to chance, and so if people think we've just got pretty boys serving a few pretty canapes, that's great, because they won't ever get exactly what we do, which is turn over every stone and make sure that it's perfect, that nothing's left to chance.
Yeah, well, don't worry, I appreciate it. I'm always, you're one of those sort of groups of people that I'm just grateful that they exist, basically, because I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't want to operate in that market, although I'd love to go to an event and see it. But all of that complexity. But hats off to you. So with the level of clientele that you're dealing with and the number of years that you've been doing this, sorry to keep mentioning that, making you feel old, but you must have seen some, particularly, I suppose, extravagant or just memorable events, perhaps for other reasons. So are there any favourites? And I know you can't always mention, who they're for necessarily, but any favourite things that spring to mind over the sort of the history of the company that always sit in your memory?
Yeah, I guess I sound a bit like an old man, but because the events that happened 10 years ago seem to be better than, I guess pre-2008, some of the events were just lavish to the extreme and incredible to work on. One store opening in Bond Street for a luxury Italian jewellery brand, they just spared no expense, and there were 300 guests, and they built a bar in the middle of the ground floor, and we had 2 or 3 of London's top martini barmen working behind the bar in their white tuxedos and serving martinis and whatever else, and then littered round the shop where there was a champagne table, so you could go and try vintage Dom Perignon against vintage Krug and Cristal and decide for yourself which you preferred. There was another table doing 3 different types of caviar. There was another table doing a seafood stand, with lobsters piled high, and those were the days where perception was really not a dirty, a dirty word, as it were. Now they're all just worried often about perception, and I totally understand it. But to organise events where money is no issue and you've just got to make it incredible, those are the ones that tend to stand out. And then for me personally, I've organised a couple of events, or one in Venice and one in Tuscany, which I would say of the highlights of my career in terms of organising events. Venice brings with it a whole level of complexity, other than obviously it's in Italy and not quite a long way away. It's also an island, and shipping things onto Venice is hard work, and it has to be, planned like a military operation. But again, I was lucky in both those events. I was working with the same production company, and by that I mean party planners, who were working for the same client, who was an individually wealthy billionaire. Really nice people to work for. And again, it wasn't so much that money wasn't the object, but if you needed something, they would give it to you rather than saying, "We'll work out a way of doing it cheaper." And that started 9 months in advance. And by the end of it, I was on my knees, but both went incredibly well. And those are the ones I look back on and incredibly proud of. And no, as I said, no one can take those away from you. So they're always going to be, even though they probably sapped a year of your life in the process. They still sort of had such beautiful memories of doing good things.
Yeah, amazing. They sound almost sort of, James Bond-esque, the sort of level of scale of some of those things, don't they? Any extreme lengths, I suppose, that you've had to go to ensure a party goes well? I suppose I'm thinking back to those earlier days when money was, no object, or maybe like you say, not necessarily, but if you wanted to do something, it had to be done. Any memories of anything when you went, well, that's bonkers, but look, we did manage to pull it off?
Not something. I know there are plenty of things out there. Mine's gone blank slightly, but there are silly things. Remember that story about a rock star leaving his hat behind in Africa and then sending his jet back to get it? Well, we've had events where, there was actually, I've suddenly remembered one. There was an event we were doing in Montenegro. It was two billionaires' 40th birthday parties, and we were trying to. Our food van had set off across Europe, and we suddenly got the news that the chances of them getting across the border in Montenegro without being stopped for 3 days were about zero. And so the van diverted to the foot of Italy. Everything was loaded onto a billionaire's yacht and then shipped across the sea and went in via a port in Montenegro, where the entire security staff of the port were paid to go away for an hour. And all the food for the event came in that way, and the show went on. But crazy things like that, having conch shells flown in from the West Indies, where you have to get a pass from the local authorities to be able to export conch. It's a kind of protected species, and then when it did come, it had to come over in a private jet, so that it got there in time. And this was for that rock star's wedding in Paris a couple of years ago. Which was in both those events I'm talking about actually ended up being in 40-degree heat. It's I think my stats for that job in Paris, on the day of the event, I did 33,000 steps according to my Fitbit, and it was never colder than 39 degrees. And that was just from 8 a.m. till midnight, and I didn't get to bed till 4 or 5 a.m. So I think that
Wow.
some of those events physically are incredibly grueling.
Yeah, and that's if that's a couple of years ago, that's in the bit of your career history where you pretty much managed to nail it and delegate everything because you had a bit of cash. So Christ knows what you were doing in the first 10 years.
There was no space where the wedding was at someone's house. There was no space for a kitchen there, so we had to prepare all the food off-site about 2 miles away in a basement flat that the production company had hired through Airbnb, and we were basically preparing all the food, which included frying off chicken and all sorts of things there, and brief all the staff there. And then at a certain point, 4 food trucks, I'd rented 4 food trucks, which turned up outside the house. We loaded all 4 food trucks with all the food for the event. And once all the guests had entered the venue and were having the reception, the food trucks pulled up outside the house. All the sides came down, and from 4 food trucks, we fed 120 people their sort of 2 courses in about 45 minutes, and then the food trucks packed up and left. But it was that I was, the event organizer was on site all day, and I was at the kitchens with all the chefs and stuff, sort of organizing that side of things. So on the big events, we all come out and help, but I hadn't done all the sort of the crossing of the T's and dotting of the I's. I've been involved in all the planning and gone over for all the visits and worked out how to do it with the event organizer. But on the day, the whole company was there. Basically, it was too big to not involve everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. You can't see, unfortunately, how big the grin is on my face as you tell these stories. I just think it's I think it's awesome, and it doesn't get any more Bond-esque than moving all of your contraband onto a private yacht and
Yeah,
paying everybody to disappear for an hour. I love it.
yeah.
It's hard to imagine with those sort of stories as the level of stuff sort of you will do. It's hard to imagine anything you won't do. But I'm kind of thinking, do you ever get clients who have it's like if you're in the trade, you know what's possible and you know what's not. But I'm guessing you must have people who have these potentially over ambitious or demanding. And have you had to do it and it's either gone wrong, or have you always managed to talk them out of it and go, you know what, really, that's beyond the realm? Or can you do anything?
Um, it's an interesting one because quite a few times Bertie and I have gone to a meeting with clients and they've either he suggested something and I'm inwardly thinking, how on earth are we going to do that? Or they're suggesting something and he's saying, yeah, we can do it. And I'm thinking, how on earth? And that said, I don't think we've ever, we've always managed to do it, even if it was incredibly hard work. But sometimes you're managing people's expectations, and there's a way of saying things to people like that. Yes, they want what they want sometimes, and they want you to make it happen. But if you say to them, if you phrased it like this, which was, we could try and do that, but the risk of it going wrong is incredibly high. And if you want to take that risk and are prepared to pay the money, then we'll do our best, but we cannot guarantee that's possible. And when you put it like that, is it a risk you really want to take? They sometimes, you'll often come up with a way of sort of giving them what they want, but it's sort of probably diluted or something like that. But, the amount of times Bertie's pushed us to do something me and the head chef didn't think was possible, and we've done it. And once you've done anything in events, you can do it again, and you can probably finesse it and make it even better. So the first time you do anything, the first time we did choreographed service was incredibly hard work, and now we rarely do an event where it's not part of it somehow. The first time you do anything, it's hard, and once you've written the template, you can do it again. So even recently during lockdown, we sort of came up with a concept to have baskets, hampers delivered to people's houses by a butler, and depending on whether the butler was allowed in or not, the houses they were allowed in, they would go in, set up the starter and set the table for the clients, put all the ingredients out for the main course, and then a famous chef came on. They all went online and onto a Zoom call, and a famous chef came on and ran them through how to cook their main course, and then we served the pudding, tidied up, and went. We did that at 50 different houses in the UK. On the same night at the same time, and that was incredibly stressful for the girl organizing it. But now we've done it once, and she's gone through the pain of developing that concept and worked out what all the pitfalls are and things like that. Then we can offer it to other people. So it's there's many things we've been asked to do which we've either done or diluted a little bit and done, and sometimes it's us suggesting things which are going to elevate that event to another level.
Amazing. I do love our sector, and I say sector as in, sort of food, drink, hospitality, all that kind of stuff, just for how innovative it is. And that's brilliant, isn't it? To be able to do, you literally take an event to people's houses, but not just do it, oh, yes, we can come to your house, but we're going to do it exactly the same time. And in a coordinated way. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Although, funnily enough, you put your finger on something you're probably going to ask me about at some point, but it's the reason we got in, we were introduced for this podcast a while ago, is that at some point we're not considered hospitality, certainly not by the government when it comes to rates relief and things like that. And yet I find out that I think there's 300,000 people who work in the events sector of hospitality. So it's an interesting one to talk about at some point.
It is, yeah. Well, we're definitely going to come back to that, and we're getting quite close. But just a couple of other quick things. So, you've mentioned your butlers a couple of times, as I think you call them. They pretty much all look like very cool dudes and models. I suppose a couple of things on that. Do you suffer from any insecurities being surrounded by such perfection? And where do you find your team? What do you look for? Presumably, you can't just go to your bulk standard agency. Certainly, when I've gone to an agency for a last minute event, that nobody arrives looking that slick. And then you mentioned clothing. You suit and boot these guys.
Yeah, I mean, we have an inner circle team of what we call the elites. It's and it's basically, these are guys who have worked for us on and off for quite a long time. They are all visually very pleasing to the eye, but more than that, they're charming and they really get what we do. And there are layers in the company, and you've got all your event organisers, and these guys are one layer below all the event organisers, and basically help us deliver pretty much every event. And they'll be the first on site and the last to leave, along with the event organizer. And these are guys chasing. I say chasing is probably not the right word. They've all got other careers. They are actors or musicians or singers, and they're chasing their personal rainbow. And whilst they're trying to make that work, and it not yet paying them what they want it to pay, they work for us, and we pay them well. We give them responsibility and trust their judgment sometimes over our own when we're in the middle of a party. And these guys help us do what we do. And then one layer below them are people who we bring in from agencies, and some of those agencies are modelling agencies, but modelling agencies where they've got a sort of where people are prepared to do sort of less glamorous work than modelling, i.e. come and be a waiter or whatever. And even lots of those guys we know personally now, and we know what their skill sets are, and they know what they're good at and what they're bad at. I mean, some guys can't stand on the front door holding a tray because they get nervous about it and start shaking, so we never put them in that position. And you're always sort of trying to get people to bring the best out in people, which, we've never been one of those companies that screams and shouts at people. It's just not what we do. Whereas I know lots of people have worked for other catering companies where the briefing is the boss shouting at everyone what they can and can't do. And before the end of it, you've got half the waiters in there are shaking, thinking, God, if I get something wrong, I'm in so much trouble. And we've always worked from a sort of more of a motivational side of things and encourage people to be, the best they can be. I mean, I've got briefing notes for events I've honed over the years, and much of it is about empowerment and saying, look, I know this is not what you want to do for the rest of your lives, but hopefully if you work hard and you'll enjoy it, and the time will fly by and you'll make some new friends. And lots of the guys who work for me are lifelong friends now. They've all, some occasionally one of them has a birthday, and getting staff for an event that night is very difficult. We have to start bribing people to work. But so the staff are an incredibly important part of what we do. And keeping that, but sometimes their career is successful and you never see them again, which is I'm part of me is delighted for them, and part of me is gutted because they're not going to be around to work for me. So
unless you can get front row tickets at Wembley, I suppose, if they've made it big because they remember you.
Invited to the movie premiere or whatever it is, and some of these guys I've known for 10, 15 years, that some of them are having babies now or whatever. So we all get on incredibly well and enjoy each other's company. I mean, I guess, we're the bosses and can't get too pally or friendly with everyone, but certainly all our event organisers and all the guys who work for us are very close and hang out together and stuff like that. And it's an important part of our ethos, and of just giving people the power to be good at what they do. And they really respond to that. I mean, some people will take the piss, and you spot them quite a long way off. And rather than firing anyone, you just don't ask them to work again. If someone doesn't want to do or doesn't want to work hard, wants to let other people do the work for them, we notice it. We don't do much more than say, do you think you could work a bit harder? But we just won't ask for them again. And when we go to an agency, we're asking for specific people most of the time. So yeah, there's a lot of those agency staff, once they've worked for us, they kind of would only, if they could, they would only work for us because we treat them well, we feed them well. They see the best events through us, and they see events done well. I mean, sometimes if your staff have to work an event which is incredibly stressful, it puts them off wanting to work for you again. And stress can come from several different ways, one of which is they never had the budget to do what they want to do, so we've understaffed it, and people are washing up glasses from half an hour into event. Two is possibly the client's not told you how many people are coming, and therefore that same situation happens. But if you put them in situations which are incredibly stressful and they're part-time staff, they just won't do it again. So we're always trying to make sure that, not mollycoddle them too much, but make sure that it's the right environment to work in. Because if your staff are stressed, then the vibe in the room, the guests will pick up on it. Whereas if your staff are all relaxed and been have been fired up just before going on to be charming and helpful and smiley and, do all the things that they know make a good party, then it makes a big difference to the finish, and, the vibe in the room.
100%. Yeah, I think people can tell, can't they? Particularly in hospitality, you can't make people, falsely seem happy and that they're enjoying their jobs. And quite often, your team are responsible for creating the energy and the buzz
Yeah,
and the environment. I always say when I train my team, I'm like, these buildings, these restaurants, they might be well kitted out and nice views, but
yeah,
they're not animated in any way until you guys, and the customers come in. Human beings animate the space, they lift it, they bring it to life, and
completely.
yeah,
And
you
sometimes
can't.
that's what gets lost when people scale up, and I suspect restaurants are know more about this than anyone. That it's all very well having our first restaurant and everyone being, everyone on site being lovely, but then as soon as you start opening more sites, it's trying to make sure not just that the food and all that kind of thing are good, but also that vibe, I mean, you and I both know it. When we go to a restaurant or go to an event and someone really good serves you, you really notice, and it makes you think so much more about that place. It adds another 20% onto the experience. It can take a good menu and in your memory make it excellent because the person dealing with you was so good at it.
Yeah, and I think people are naturally inclined, if you're really good, they prefer to work for the independent sort of restaurant where they're a little bit closer to the ethos or the culture or the owner, and they get it in the same way that I'm sure, the agencies that you work with who do supply you stuff, those staff wouldn't necessarily go and wash glasses, at Pizza Hut one night because the agency had asked, but they'll come and help you out and do it because it's a big event and you've treated them well and you've looked after them.
Yeah.
So these things fit together. As well as the sort of importance of your team, you've obviously got the importance of your clients, and we sort of joked a little bit about this earlier around me not being able to find out a huge amount about you, and you certainly don't advertise anywhere that I'm looking. I don't know whether you do advertise in general, but presumably this is deliberate. So where do you find your clients, and is this a very niche market? Have you got lots of competition in this sort of premium space that you're operating in?
There is a lot of competition for event catering, and but it feels like we've carved out a niche for ourselves at the top of the market. Certainly, in terms of if you consider the top of the market to be working for fashion, luxury brands, high net worth individuals, that kind of area. And obviously, there are always other people out there who are doing what they do, and they're doing it very well. And there's some great new companies around. The smaller ones struggle to do the bigger stuff that we do, but we don't just do big stuff. We do the whole range. But what we there was a question you asked right at the beginning.
It was yeah. So how do you do you advertise? I suppose is the
No,
word. And where do you find your
we
clients, or how do they find you?
been very organic, our growth over the years, and part of that is because we were learning how to be businessmen and learning how to do what we were doing, and we're always so busy that advertising just didn't cross our minds. We're quite good at our marketing. We would often be written up by magazines, or PR companies might use us to sort of form part of a story for an event and things like that. So we've been quite good at getting free PR over the years and being written up in the Evening Standard or Glamour magazine or whatever it may be. There are all sorts of magazines who have written articles about us over the years. But there was one of them used an expression which is London's below the radar favourites, and this was 10 years ago that this was written. But it was kind of true at the moment that if you could have, if you knew who we were and could afford to use us, then we didn't need it negated the reason to advertise. The minute we became too well known, people weren't sort of so interested. So now we've got to the point where we're always doing a bit of PR and doing a bit of marketing, but we don't advertise per se. And there's an old saying in events: you're only as good as your last event. And if you do a good event, people might tell 2 or 3 people. If you do a bad event, they'll tell 10 people. So we are, we're constantly looking over our shoulder. There needs to be a healthy bit of paranoia when you do what we do, because there's always someone looking to do it better than you are and trying to and steal your clients and steal those events. So there's a healthy little bit of paranoia and keep an eye on the competition. And fortunately, Bertie does more of that worrying than I do. I'm more worried about the finances and making sure, whereas he's always worried about what it is we're doing being better than anyone else, and not sitting on your resting on your laurels and thinking you own this sector, because you only own that sector as long as you're doing the job better than anyone else is. So it's a tough market, but I do, and I say there's always other people trying to do it. And as long as we carry on doing what we're doing and reinventing ourselves for certain things, then we have an immense loyalty from our clients. I mean, there's a few shops on Bond Street we've been dealing with now for sort of 16, 17 years, and they've not ever used another caterer. And they would go to someone else in a heartbeat if we didn't keep giving them what they wanted.
That makes sense. And then you touched on this a little bit earlier about sort of, maybe some of the most amazing events you've done were sort of in the first 10 years rather than the latter 10. People perhaps less ambitious. You mentioned this decadence, or perception was the word you used. Do you think is some of that this sort of environmental awareness, I suppose? Because I think it's the same with luxury hotels. It can be really hard to do luxury and be environmentally aware. Just if you just think of the toiletries sometimes in nice hotels, and the linen that's cleaned every day, and all this kind of stuff. As one of the reasons that events change, do people tend to come to you now much more aware of environmental impact? Or if you're a billionaire and you want to do a big event, is it not really relevant?
It's a difficult one to answer, because everyone is more aware of waste. And unfortunately, the events industry is a very wasteful industry. Often things are built. I mean, certainly, I'm talking above the catering sort of side of things. Obviously, there's big companies out there who organise events, and those events could range from a conference for the Liberal Democrats in Brighton or whatever to, the sort of events we do, but things are built specially for that event, and when it's over, they used to just get thrown on the scrap heap, and now people are far more aware of trying to recycle what's been used or cut down on things. I wouldn't say it's gone as far as I'd like it to have gone. I mean, obviously, to a certain degree, all I can affect is what we do at work and how we run our business. And I wouldn't say we're whiter than white, but we try our hardest to recycle everything. From food to plastic to cardboard to all of that kind of things. We opted out of the plastic straws quite a long time ago and use metal or glass straws for every event now. And, the clients are happy to pay for that extra money that goes into washing them and all that kind of thing. We try and source locally where possible, but certain seasons in this country are not great for food. The Hungry Gap and things like that. So we personally do what we can, but I'm sure we can continue to do better. Unfortunately, it is one of those things that when you're doing well, and you can afford to sort of spend money on these things, and when you've had the sort of year that we've had, it's difficult to carry on with those ambitious sort of projects, as it were, which putting back in the community or whatever. But we're hoping that we can get back to carry. We have a recycling committee at work which sits down once a month and works out how we can do things better and continue to improve. And then, we also deal with sourcing and that kind of thing. But the events industry as a whole is getting much better, and people are far more aware of it. But I'm sure it could get better. And at the end of the day, if the client, and actually, there's a lot to be said for, if the person at the top of the tree insists on it being done in a certain way, then everyone falls into line. And if it only takes people at the top of the tree to not really care or not insist on it, and people further down the tree think, well, no one's mentioned it, let's not worry about it. So I do think it's something that starts at the top, whether it's government or whatever, that if you're made to start thinking about things, you just have to fall in line and do it. So there's lots.
Interesting. And that perception, I guess, of brands, if they are seen to be wasteful, like you say, the jewellery company that once upon a time would spend all of that money and be very flash. Now there's this perception, even if it's monetary related, I suppose, where they're saying that they don't want to be seen to be wasting the cash and just passing on the cost in the product. But hopefully there's an environmental element to that as well.
I mean, there was always a business rationale behind what they did, even in the days of excess. It was, they wanted their brand to be synonymous with good times and for the people with the money to come and spend money. And obviously, in more recent years, there's a business rationale, but towards doing more targeted kind of entertainment, not too ostentatious, but still, they are spending money. They're just doing it in a cleverer, more subtle way, and trying to get their brand message across in a slightly cleverer way. And each of the brands have their own way of doing things. Their own, there's a French fashion brand who are always about, they want you to understand the quality of what they do and how they make it. So they'll often have people hand stitching leather goods in their events and sort of really bringing the artisan nature of what they do into it. But when it comes to wastage, I mean, I can't speak for all of them, but I'm sure luxury brands, they're all doing their bit. They have to. I'm sure we can all do more. There's always more.
Yeah. 100%. But at least we're having the conversation now, even the fact we're talking about it. So I think the trajectory is positive. I suppose it's the speed of that trajectory, which is often the challenge. So let's chat then about this issue, because you and I were introduced a few months ago, and I think we were right in the depths. God knows what number lockdown we were on, and things were looking very sketchy at the time. But the big thing, I suppose, is that hospitality as an overall sector has had a lot of publicity. We've been very fortunate in that way. You look at airlines and you look at cruise ships, and there's so many parts of that. And I'm sure there's lots of forgotten parts of business that have been affected. But you seem to, events almost, like you say, it's not hospitality as far as the government's concerned. It probably is for everybody that's involved in the world of food and drink. We absolutely recognise your importance. So what's your experience been then during this COVID? Presumably, really blurred lines on what you can do and when you can do it, and then really hazy definitions of when you're going to be able to do what you do. Just tell me about, I suppose, the experience of the last 12 months and your thoughts and feelings on COVID and events.
Yeah, I guess 12 months down the line, I've become relatively phlegmatic about it all. There's some things I can change and do, and there's some things I can't change. But as for all of us early on in lockdown, there was none of us ever experienced anything like this before. And as you say, there are industries which were worse hit than us, and such as my brother owns nightclubs in London. They haven't done one dot of business in 12 months, and obviously the airlines and hotels and things like that. I think hospitality's had some good PR. Obviously you've been involved in the drive for a minister of hospitality, and it's almost at that point when I listened to your podcast where you interviewed sort of 10 people in the industry, and not one person throughout that entire podcast mentioned events. And I thought, are we, or and obviously the government, I say obviously, everyone you speak to says, of course you're hospitality, but when it came to the revenue, who were sort of calling the shots, announcing who was on the list of people who would get, say, rates relief, which was a big, which is quite a large chunk of money for most businesses. Catering companies and events companies were not on there. And I've realised since that basically the way they define it is if you've got a door that is open to the public, you open the shop door in the morning and people can walk through it, then you are either retail or hospitality, one or the other, and you got the rates rebate. But anyone with a unit or a warehouse where you travel to different places each time just were completely, there was a sort of a gap in the pavement, which we've all gone down. And we fought long and hard to try and get that rates relief, along with any other grants that were going. And until recently, we were singularly unsuccessful with that. And that, part of it's because the revenue devolved responsibility for handing out these grants to local councils who, and they were given a little bit of leeway to sort of define things the way they felt they should. And they certainly had some discretionary powers in all of these grants, but they certainly didn't advertise this. And actually getting someone on the end of the phone or someone to answer an email was nigh on impossible. I mean, even writing to my local MP, it took her 3 months to answer my email. And in the meantime, I could hear lots of MPs in Parliament every now and then, asking Rishi Sunak about how come one of my constituents is a company that deals with power for events. They haven't got a shop. Why are they considered not part of hospitality? They're totally dependent on it, and yet they haven't got this relief and that relief. So I was a little bit sort of angry is probably too strong a word, but annoyed for a long time that we seem to be forgotten, even by hospitality. Because when all of these, when the hospitality sector were pushing for lots of things, I'm sure they weren't asking for the events companies to be included in all of this. And I was, trying to sort of make sure we weren't forgotten. But we don't really have an industry voice. particularly.
Mm.
Not like you guys have developed off, like hospitality has developed for itself recently, which is becoming quite a powerful voice. We didn't really have an events body, so that's been tough.
Yeah. I bet. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it just almost feels like a bit of a no-brainer. Like you say, although you don't have people coming to you, it's like, if only 6 people can meet, then clearly you can't run events. So
Well,
you're in the eye of the storm. So although I would say that people banging the drum, weren't necessarily including events, they certainly weren't excluding events. They probably just presumed that it was a bit of a no-brainer to go, yeah, like if you go and do events in other people's building, that's still
yeah.
hospitality, I suppose. And I can imagine how frustrating that must have been to
Well,
watch that.
also speaking to other catering companies, I spoke to one chap who's got several catering companies within their sphere, and they're all in different boroughs. And it was interesting to see how the different boroughs, the different councils, were dealing with each of these, the same issue, and they had been given quite a lot of latitude. So some gave out the rates relief quite early on to some catering companies and events companies, especially if there was a loophole that would help them. I.e., some guy said, "Look, we host tastings here, about 15 tastings here a year, and at which point the doors open for someone in the public to come in, a bit like a private room at a posh London restaurant or something like that. So you can't turn up to the Gavroche and expect to just walk in the door unless you've got a booking. So other boroughs took a bit more of a different view to it, but the borough I'm in North London, Brent Council, been quite difficult to A, speak to anyone, and B, they even turned us so catering companies, obviously in deepest, darkest lockdown, can't do anything. But and then when lots of hospitality places could open up, we're allowed to do things. But as you say, it's 6 people at a party is not quite the same. So we haven't been able to do. It's not been good for restaurants. But when you're allowed to trade, it's pretty good, especially when it's tables of 6. And I know some restaurants where people I know are their managers. They've turned over 700 covers in a day, in September or something like that. So, and yet we are running at, funnily enough, we've just finished our year-end figures, and we've turned over 15% of our normal turnover and lost £500,000 this year. And, our landlords, that's the other interesting aspect, is how landlords have treated this, the whole pandemic. Retail landlords, on the whole, have been much more understanding and much more businesslike about what they expect from their tenants, who are obviously having terrible times. Whereas commercial landlords are arguing that nothing's changed. In fact, commercial property is increasing in value because there's more online companies, there's more dark kitchens, there's that warehouses are more in demand than they were before. So we had a rent review last June, which went on for 6 months because we were arguing about whether the pandemic should have affected our rent, and we basically lost that, and so our rent got put up in the middle of a pandemic, and the only thing they've done to help us, our landlords, is say, well, rather than that rent increase starting immediately, we're going to delay it for 2 years, but then you'll have to pay the whole lot back over the 3 years following that. So it's been, and we've struggled to get any other than, so we did finally get an additional restrictions grant, which we're supposed to put towards our rates, but the additional restrictions grant was supposed to be for fixed costs for companies who can't really operate under lockdown or guidelines, and to help with rent, electricity, insurances, vehicle finances and things like that. So the only help we've had is furlough, and thank God for furlough. I mean, without it, we would have gone bust by now, or had to sack all of our staff. And that's one thing we're very proud of, that throughout all of this, I think we've only let one member, a couple of staff have gone. They've decided to go and do something else, which is totally understandable. Didn't want to wait. And a couple have gone home to Brazil or whatever, until it's all over. And we've only lost one member of staff, because they just didn't seem to want to be involved at all, even during lockdown. So, but other than that, we've kept the team together, and furlough has enabled us to do that, even though we are losing money every month to the tune of sort of 50 grand a month, something like that. We've kept the team together, and I've often said to people, it's all very well making money for quite a long time, but if when the minute things go wrong, you sack everyone just so you don't lose money, I think that's wrong. And my business partner and I made a decision early on in this that even if it cost us £500,000 to £1,000,000 of all the money we had in the bank, we weren't just going to throw everyone out, especially and when business comes back, if we don't have our team there, it takes years to grow that kind of team. So, we've taken a view that we are going to lose money, but we'll get through it somehow.
Well, you sound, remarkably stoic on the basis, like you say, you've been going through this for a year now, I guess, as we all here have. You're absolutely right that, it's been devastating for so much of the sector. But, I'm in a position where I'm very lucky that at least when I do open the doors and have been able to, even though there's been some bonkers restrictions, not so much December, Christmas parties with, two hands tied behind our backs, where we were probably losing more money by being open than being shut. But in the main, we've been able to take some cash, which has been a lifesaver. You can't sustain that forever. You can't carry on losing 50 grand. You can't carry on keeping people employed you don't need. What's your, I suppose if you're looking at the horizon, how are you feeling things are going to change? You've mentioned seasonality, that you've got quite a short season. That's going to be even shorter this year than normal. How do you see the next sort of 6 to 12 months panning out? And do you think that the government are going to need to do more? Have you sort of lost the will to hope for that anymore?
We've been waiting to see how our clients will react to the roadmap, and they've been quite slow to react. I think they're probably more concerned about just getting their shops open and things like that. We've had lots of private inquiries, but it's a very competitive market. Obviously we are not the cheapest. So it's been quite hit and miss with getting the private stuff, but it feels like, May's picking up a little bit for sort of small events, but then after June the 21st, we're just starting to get a few inquiries and so we might have a couple of weeks of being crazy busy after June the 21st, and we'll use flexible furloughing to enable us to sort of do those and look after our regular clients. I mean, funnily enough, just harking back to what you said about sometimes it's not worth opening, because you're going to lose money. But for us, saying no to our clients means they'll go and find somebody else who can do it, and then the chances are they won't be there when next time. Sometimes you have to lose money on things just to retain clients. But after June 21st, I mean, the government have said after June 21st we can do whatever we like. I'm still waiting for all the for the sting in the tail, which is, you can do all you like as long as everyone's wearing a mask or a meter distant, or this is the bit that I'm waiting to find out, because that will, big events is where we make money. It's doing all the shop stuff pays the bills, but in terms of sort of actually making money in the busy times of year, we rely on those Cartier Polo kind of events and big events for 500 people in the Serpentine Summer Party. And if things like that can't happen, then we're going to struggle in the future. It's a bit like you only being told you can only open at 70% capacity. You're going to struggle to make money on 70-80% capacity. So I'm waiting to find out if there's going to be details added to what we can do, which make it more difficult to do things. And reality is, it probably won't go back to normal for us until September, and only then, as long as there aren't some silly, some things put in where everyone's got to have a COVID passport to come to the event. I think the more barriers that are put in the way of hosting big events, the less they will happen and the less people will want to do it.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm more stressed about, your business now or back when you were hosting those massive parties and it might all go wrong on the night. I don't know. I'm going to need a glass of, if it wasn't so early in the day, I'd probably have had to have a glass of wine with this conversation.
The other interesting thing is, you've obviously been getting ready for your reopening recently, and we're also frightened of being a bit of being a bit rusty, that when we've not done anything more than sort of 30 people for 6 months. I mean, we did a bit of business at Christmas and a few Christmas parties and stuff, but along the lines of pop-up restaurants and stuff, or restaurants where everyone was seated at tables of 6, we haven't really done anything, and we are nervous that we need to make sure that we're not too rusty to deliver the quality that people come to expect from us. So that's on our sort of plate at the moment of what do we need to do to make sure we're match fit. And it's about, some people have got quite used to working from home and not going to the office and not having to work late at nights and things like that. So it's we need to manage our people well and make sure our systems are all, are all oiled and ready to go. And as with everything in events, as soon as you've got a date, it focuses the mind. So now we've got these, we've got a few things coming in after the 21st of June. It's starting to focus our mind on being ready for those dates. Before that, a couple of small things, got a wedding at the end of May, got, a few more hampers to do, have a few waiters in shops, that kind of thing. But after the 21st of June, I think we might have 2 or 3 weeks of busyness, and then it will go away probably for July, August, when everyone wants to go on holiday, and then come back in September. So we just got to, we've kept the team together. We just now need to make sure the team is match fit come match day.
Well, I think once we're allowed to, I think there is going to be this huge amount of pent-up demand. You just look at weddings, isn't it? You think, God, there's a year's worth of people who haven't got married who will want to. So I think the demand's going to be there. I can give you some reassurance on the team front. I was very worried about, reopening and the team being rusty. And I was worried about, even when we were shut, you try and do things to keep the team gelled and a bit of online training. But I was just like, the banter and the way that people work together, and like I say, the animation and the energy the team bring to the buildings, is that going to be instantaneous? And what do we do about that? And a customer's going to be reasonable. But, we had the team in the week before we reopened, and it was just so exciting. I remember being stood in the middle of the restaurant, and I looked around, and, there was a couple of people behind the bar sort of filling the fridges, and there was a chef was sat down with one of the managers, literally writing the menu and uploading it onto the website. And just everywhere I looked, somebody was sort of sat filling up the ketchups and the mayonnaises. And there was just this, it was just really, I don't know, it was emotional to see these buildings start to come back to life.
My turn to have a nice smile on my face. I can just sort of imagine it, and you surveying the scene and thinking, well, this is what we're supposed to do, what this place should be doing. And it's been, there's silver linings to everything in life. I'm old enough now to realize that, bad things happen sometimes, but you can take positives from it. And my God, don't we all appreciate eating out? I've been out 2 or 3 times and sat freezing in garden somewhere, but absolutely loved it. And, my kids appreciate school now. We appreciate, there's so much we took for granted. And now, as we slowly get our freedoms back, there's things we really appreciate now. And I can just imagine you smiling as the life gets pumped back into your busy place. And we've yet to get there. The closest we get at the moment is a few of us go to the office on a Wednesday to sort of, to sort of check on the building and make sure, do a bit of work. And even when 3 or 4 of us are in the office, there's a nice buzz, and we really miss that. I always, all these companies that are talking about never forcing people to go to the office again, everyone being working from home, they will miss something, and maybe they can't put their finger on it at the moment. But human interaction and getting to know your colleagues and working as a team and bouncing ideas off each other doesn't work so well on Zoom. It doesn't work so well when you can't see someone or overhear them having a giggle with somebody else. Or I had to answer a survey for somehow I got on the list of companies that the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, contacts the whole time, and I'm constantly filling out surveys for them, and they're asking all sorts of questions. And some of it is, will you be expecting your staff to, you're going to allowing them to work from home or offer flexi time? And we'll do a little bit of that, but we are pretty firmly convinced that a buzzing office, a buzzing building where everyone comes in to work is a much more productive place, certainly for events. And obviously, when it comes to the event itself, you can't not go. We've got to go to that. But in terms of people come to the office, we would allow some people, and I've always said this, some people are very trustworthy to work from home and others aren't. There are some people who are probably putting in 2 or 3 hours a day when they're saying they're doing 6 or 7. Whereas other people who probably work harder because they feel guilty about being at home. But we want to find that nice, work-life balance as much as possible. But the buzz in the office is key, we think.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. And everyone I'm speaking to seems to. And even the team members, I think, it's this hybrid. It's like, yes, we've learned a bit about flexibility, and it's nice on occasions to work from home and sometimes missing the commute. And actually, it's just nice to be trusted that, if the job needs doing, it is about getting the job done and not where I do it. However, everybody I speak to, whether that's the bosses and the MDs or even the teams, they miss it. They want to be in there at least a few days a week and getting that sort of relationship and banter. And I think if you work in our sector, front facing with people, it's even more relevant. We've got to draw to a close very shortly because we're running out of time. But is there there anything you've done? You mentioned earlier about hampers and things that you've trialed, and I presumably these aren't things that you've done before, but you were just sort of racking your brains trying to work out a way of doing events and keeping your team busy in a pandemic. Have any of these things sort of surprised you and worked well, where you think you will continue to offer them in the future, or are they all things that are sort of very, very much negligible in the overall sort of business plan?
At the end of the day, we react to what our clients want. So if anyone wants that thing in the future, we've learned how to do it. We've built our templates. We can show them lots of samples and that kind of thing. But our business isn't really geared up financially to do that, because the sums of money involved don't even touch the site. So we've had a couple of weeks where we've had the whole 10 or 11 people in packaging and doing all the rest of it, but we've still turned over a tenth of what we normally would. So yes, we can still offer it as an extra, but it's not something that we're going to, and we'll do it when we're asked, but it's not something that we are, scaled, basically built to do in terms of the business. We've got two, 14,000 square foot of warehousing and offices and kitchens, and they don't get paid for by sending out some luxury hampers. It's the events that that are the lifeblood of what we do, and so no, we're hoping it's back to events. We've tried hard to reinvent ourselves during lockdown, and have done some stuff we're proud of, such as helping the NHS feed some of the. We're basically right next door to an ambulance station, so in early lockdown, where lots of our suppliers and us had leftover food for about 6 weeks to 2 months, we managed to, I think, make 10,000 meals from people working at home, and then one of our drivers would go and pick all the things up and then deliver them to the ambulance station, who would distribute them either to their staff or to other ambulance stations. So there have been things like that we've managed to do to keep us busy. But no, going forward, we want to get back to events and doing what we do well.
Yeah, they must have loved having you as a neighbour, the ambulance service. They lucked out there, didn't they?
We improved our neighbourly relations, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. You get priority blue light service if you ever need it, but and hopefully you won't.
Yeah, it's quite reassuring having them next door in case something goes wrong, or a chef manages to cut their finger off or something like that.
Yeah, hypothetically. You've mentioned Bertie a couple of times as well, by the way, and I'm conscious some people will be going, "Who the hell's Bertie?" So he's the so your partner in the business. How did you two meet? How did you two end up doing this adventure together?
Well, I've forgotten that we talked about him before you started recording, but he's got one of those fantastic events names, Bertie de Rougemont. He's two of us have similar backgrounds, and we met. He used to work for Sony many years ago, sort of marketing and PR and that kind of side of things, and then left to set up his own sort of corporate events company doing wine tastings and things like that. And that's when I met him, because my wife at the time was waitressing for him as she pursued her writing career. And at some point she said, "You guys should meet, because you don't know what you want to do," i.e. me, and he is very good at some things, but I can see he's not so good at other things. And so we had some mutual friends anyway, so we met, and I started working for him. And after a few years, that was going well, but the company was struggling, and we had to shut that company down. And then we set a new company up together back in 2004, I think it was, something like that, 2005. And it was hard work for quite a few years after that. But after the last 10 years, it's worked, and we've been able to pay ourselves salaries and things like that. But it's one of those journeys I'm sure you're all too familiar with in events and that kind of thing, is killing yourself for a long time to try and make something work which you believe in and that you're passionate about. And eventually, when it does work, you can hopefully take your foot off the gas a bit and try and find a bit more of a balance between life and work and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's the dream, I think. And I feel like it never feels like it happens consistently for a very long period of time, but I do make the most of whenever I'm like, my goodness, I've got a GM in each venue, I've got a head chef in each venue, the team are doing well, we're busy. And now I really appreciate those moments, because what I do know is inevitable is that's not always going to be the case. Something always seems to go wrong, and the roller coaster of business is relentless. Look, I've really thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. I think you're in an incredible space. It's been brilliant. Where should people go? You don't advertise, so don't bother. But I will say your Instagram page is amazing. The quality of the shots on there, absolutely incredible. But any other burning issues that you want to mention? And if not, where should people go if they do want to find out the little bit that you will tell
Well,
them?
as you said, Instagram, and we do have a website, but we're not the greatest at keeping it updated. What we tend to find with the website is people just, take your ideas off it. So we Instagram's our shop window, really, and and obviously, during lockdown, there's not been quite as much of Instagram as we would like, but no burning issues. Just really hope we can all get back to what we love doing. Serving people and doing great events. And hopefully things are have turned the corner, and there is a way out of all of this. I'm sure there are a few twists in the tail to come, but hopefully if we had this same interview next year, things will really have improved, and we'll sort of be back to normal.
I hope so. I was down at my restaurant on Sunday, and we had a DJ doing a sort of live radio show outside on the terrace. And we're lucky because we're on the beach, so there's plenty of space for people to spread out. And there were people kind of dancing and having a few drinks, and nobody was being silly. Nobody was on top of each other. But because it was outside, not everybody had a mask on, so you could see people's face and people smiling. And oh my God, did it feel amazing just to get a little glimmer. It was a tenth of what we would normally do, but you just thought, how exciting is it? And you could see, people walking past were stopping and taking photos and videos because they were just so bloody excited to see a bit of normality. So,
nice.
Fingers crossed. It was good fun. Right. Well, look, thank you, Adam. Really appreciate you sparing the time. I will pop your details up on the show notes that will go with this episode. But best of luck. If you're ever in Bournemouth, come down and say hello and see me. And hopefully one day I'll have done well enough to get invited to one of your events.
Well, I'm often in the Isle of Purbeck, so I may take you up on that offer at some point. But,
amazing. What are you doing there?
We have an old family cottage that my great grandfather built back in the day.
I love the Purbecks. I'm over there with my son on Saturday on a bike ride. So, maybe I'll see you there. We'll have a beer in the banks or something.
Perfect, because literally about half a mile from the banks. But,
amazing. All right.
Talk to you, Mark. Take care.
Thanks, Adam. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed Adam's stories and journey so far. Head over to the website for links to his website and Instagram pages at humansofhospitality.co.uk. And remember, whilst you are there, do sign up for the newsletter that I send out with each new release. You can even buy me a thank you beer on that site by hitting the Patreon or PayPal button. It's hot and sunny, so a cold beer always appreciated. That's it for now. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Cheers.